We are talking Windows Virtual Desktop with the CEO of Nerdio in a special guest interview, news stories from SYNNEX, WatchGuard, Tech Data, 4 ideas for retaining your top people, the 2019 ChannelPro SMB All-Star Awards, and more. It's ChannelPro Weekly, episode 120. Pour me over something. Hello, everyone, and welcome to ChannelPro Weekly, episode 120. My name is Matt Whitlock, technology editor, online director, and your host of this fine audio program for you, the VAR, the integrators, the MSPs, the IT resellers, the MSSPs, the MSS ECCP LCDPs. Yes, that one too. I'm sure that's a thing, because anything that has a big, long acronym is a thing. But this is your show, and joining me this week to discuss the latest news and insights and topics for you, all of those acronyms that I just said, is executive editor of ChannelPro, Rich Freeman.
Hello, everybody.
How are you, Rich?
I'm good.
We haven't seen your bright, shiny face in a while because you ditched us last week.
I'm so sorry about that. I was at, and we'll be chatting about this a little bit, I was at the SYNNEX Inspire event in Greenville and booked up really tight. I was looking for just any little window in my schedule where I could fit in a podcast recording session. Just could not make it work. So kudos to Dave Seibert for stepping in.
Yeah, he did a great job. It was a great show. I don't want to say that you weren't missed, because you were missed. Nobody goes to the news like you. I did my best Rich Freeman impersonation, and it wasn't. I can do a lot of voices. I can't do yours, just so you know. But no, it was good. It was a good show. I hope Dave had a good time, and I really appreciated him on to do it. And we got a jam-packed show today, Rich. Lots of fun stuff. You want to kind of tell everybody what's going to happen?
Yeah, actually. So one of the many reasons why I was kicking myself for not being on the podcast last week is that there was a major development in the news. And in fact, I was so busy with other stuff, I didn't even get to write about this. So I was at least hoping to talk about it on the podcast. We will get to do that this week. Microsoft has put Windows Virtual Desktop into general availability. And we have touched on this topic on the podcast. We've spoken about it before. I happen to think this is the next Office 365 or Microsoft 365. I think it's a big deal. And so we're going to be talking about that with the CEO of Nerdio. And folks will get more information about that company and what they do. But I mean, essentially, it's a little bit like good old SBS, Small Business Server from Microsoft. It's a complete SMB and network environment that is 100% streamed. And so everyone over there is super familiar with the Microsoft Cloud and Azure, and they agree with me that Windows Virtual Desktop is a big deal. So we're going to get an insider expert kind of perspective on why WVD is such a big deal in a live interview on the show.
Yeah, it's going to be lots of fun. That's coming up probably in about 15 minutes or so. But so we're going to have the CEO of Nerdio joining us to talk about that live and in person. So that's going to be a lot of fun and very insightful. We also got a lot of news to cover this week, Rich. We've got a couple stories that came out of that SYNNEX show that you were at last week. We got a story on WatchGuard that we're going to talk about. 2 quickies from Tech Data, if we can fit them in. Plus, Dave and I last week mentioned the 2019 ChannelPro SMB All-Star Awards. We didn't really go into too much of a deep dive. We talked about Arnie a little bit with the Lifetime Achievement Award that we've added this year. But we're going to go through and we'll talk about some of those and some of the decisions that were made and who some of the all-stars are. We're also going to talk about digital marketing agencies, and there's an interesting spin on that story, so we'll get to that. And 4 ideas for retaining your top people. So a lot to go over, Rich. This is going to be a jam-packed, super insightful show.
Just the way I like them.
That's the way I like them too. The way this will work, though, is we're going to go ahead and start talking about the news, and eventually, and as soon as our interview guest arrives, we will cut and we'll take a short break, get him set up, and then we'll do our interview, and then we'll just resume wherever we were, since this is kind of bringing them in and kind of live as we record. So a little bit different than how we probably normally do things when we record interviews, not live. So. But we'll make it work, Rich.
Of course.
Okay. All right. We got a lot of news. So let's go ahead and dive into that and talk about some of the things that happened at SYNNEX. Rich, what's going on at SYNNEX? How was the food?
Food was good. Greenville, South Carolina. Anytime I go to the South, I eat well, and yeah, food was great in Greenville, and the content was great too. It was a great show. Two things in particular. There were two news items that they timed to release during this partner event, both of which are worth calling folks' attention to. So, first off, they introduced a new managed security program. Basically, they're positioning it as a complete sort of life cycle security outsourcing option for their partners. All the different aspects from the beginning to the end of the security life cycle, from assessment to antivirus, security operations center, ongoing user education, compliance, all that stuff is available through this new managed security program that they've introduced. Now, they had outsourced security options before that they were offering to their partners. What's a little bit different about this time is the sort of end-to-end nature of the program and the fact that it brings together different services from a number of different vendors. Before, you could go to SYNNEX, and if you were interested in acquiring an outsourced security service from a particular vendor, they could do that for you on a one-off kind of basis. Now you can kind of sign up for a program that gives you lots of different solution category options, and in most cases, multiple vendor options within those different categories. Now, what's interesting in talking about this with the folks at SYNNEX, because they are obviously not the first people in the world of distribution to have managed security offerings. Tech Data has been doing a lot of this. You can get this kind of thing, I believe, to at least some extent from Ingram Micro, and probably D&H as well. So naturally, the question arises, what differentiates this from some of those other offerings out there? And they said that what they view as their differentiator is that they will absolutely give you the option as a partner, if you want, to permanently outsource these functions to SYNNEX, but their focus is really going to be on enabling you eventually to take on these functions yourself. So that they're going to be, and in fact, they're staffing up, they're putting money into partner enablement so that the people who sign on to this service essentially learn how to deliver the service themselves, and down the road don't need to do it through distribution anymore. And of course, if you do get to that point with your business, the payoff is a little more margin. You're not sharing that function with a distributor. So kind of an interesting spin on where they see themselves going with managed security.
It'll have to be a pretty significant margin difference to make a partner want to take all that on themselves, right? Because if I was I'm just putting myself in their shoes. If I was a partner and I said, well, I can outsource this to you and I can make 20 points, or I can learn to take it all on myself and make 22 points, I don't think I would be very interested in doing that myself. So did they mention what the differences is going to be if you do it yourself?
Well, I mean, they can't necessarily know that, but
right, because you have to build a bundle. But did it sound like it would be significantly more money to do it yourself?
Yes, and yet I would say the point you're making is a really important one. I mean, I think for a lot of MSPs, the investments required to take those kinds of functions on yourself are going to be pretty substantial, both in terms of money and in terms of people. So I do think, I mean, my feeling about the whole managed security service provider, MSSP opportunity, is that the vast majority of MSPs out there will be doing some form of managed security because they need to. It's increasingly a requirement for protecting your customers adequately. But I don't think most MSPs will truly become MSSPs themselves. I think they will be partnering with somebody, whether it's a distributor or a full-time MSSP, precisely because the margins, the investments required are so substantial.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So what else is in this offering that is significant and important? Because they're talking about some stuff in here about layering components and that kind of stuff. Tell us about that.
Right. Well, I mean, that gets to the whole idea of this being an end-to-end kind of offering now, as opposed to a one-off offering where, as I understand it, there's essentially a menu of different functions that you can pick from, and, utilize, pay for, manage in an aggregated kind of way. So simplified access to a number of different security offerings in one place.
Okay.
It's worth mentioning, there's been some significant merger and acquisition activity in the distribution world in recent years. Tech Data bought the Avnet Technology Solutions business. The big acquisition that SYNNEX made was buying Westcon Comstore, which was kind of a value-added distributor, a bit of a specialty distributor that focused on networking, unified communications, and security. And this solution here is part of, one manifestation of the payoff of that investment, rather substantial investment that SYNNEX made when it bought Westcon Comstore, because they acquired, along with that company, additions to their line card that make this offering possible.
Very cool. All right. Well, there was I think that kind of sums that up. So, and for those who don't know, you can go and find the show notes page for this episode, or if you're watching the video like live on YouTube, we put all of the links to all of the news stories that we talk about in the comment in the show notes or the description area of the video. So if you click that link, and the description pops open, so that way you can follow along and kind of read the more meat of the story as we go through these. So, Rich, there's one other story that came out of SYNNEX that I don't think will take very long to discuss, but certainly interesting. Why don't you tell me about this AR story?
Yeah, so during the Inspire event, SYNNEX announced that they are now distributing Google Glass, the augmented reality device from Google, which is, for the most part, thought of and is used as a consumer device today. SYNNEX sees potential for it as a business tool, and potentially as an ingredient, a component in Internet of Things solutions. So right now, today, you can just order one-off Google Glass now through SYNNEX, which something that you couldn't do. You couldn't get that product through distribution before. Down the road is where this begins to get a little bit more interesting. So they didn't get into this in detail. They were kind of hinting at it, but I think it's pretty clear that they are in the process of developing IoT solutions that will incorporate this product, and trying to look for ways for their reseller partners to essentially productize and profit from glass. To me, it's just also kind of interesting because SYNNEX has been sort of out in front in terms of some of the vendor relationships and the product decisions that they've been making in cloud mobility and IoT. The gentleman who runs cloud mobility and IoT for SYNNEX is named Rob Moyer. And he spent a lot of his time, studying R&D budgets at the biggest companies in the industry, the Googles and Microsofts and the Facebooks, and he familiarizes himself with where those companies are coming and thinks about how those, where those companies are going, rather, and thinks about how those technologies might, be used by a channel partner in the context of a business solution, and then takes, in comparison with other companies, some pretty early steps to skate to where the puck is going, essentially, and instead of where it is. This is a good example of that. A few weeks ago, SYNNEX introduced the Google Pixel line of devices, and right now, according to Moyer, it's a nice revenue generator for SYNNEX. They're selling even a little bit better, it sounded like, than expected. But there's this whole ecosystem that's growing up around Google and Google hardware right now, and it maybe doesn't amount to a huge amount today, but it probably will at some point down the road. And SYNNEX is preparing itself essentially to incorporate those products and build them into solutions as the demand for them rises over time.
And they really see augmented reality taking form and evolving over the next, they said 12 to 24 months. You really think
he said 12, 18, 24 months. And I mean, I
know, but you know what, Rich, 2 years ago, we would have said 12, 18, 24 months, right? And we're still kind of in this weird spot with AR. I know we talked about this a couple shows ago.
Yeah.
So what is going to change in AR that's going to make this finally something that gets traction?
Well, I think this whole idea of there being maybe prepackaged solutions. So, I mean, a big part of the problem right now, aside from the fact that the companies that are making these products aren't necessarily, most of them anyway, aren't heavily focused on commercial applications. There are companies out there that make AR devices specifically for the commercial environment. Those tend to be pretty expensive devices. So the ones that are a little bit more affordable aren't necessarily optimized for business use. And there's a lot of sort of whiteboard potential around those products, but it can be kind of labor intensive to bring that potential to life. So this idea of a company like SYNNEX and other vendors, other distributors, assembling solutions. So you're not buying a product and then trying to figure out what to do with it. You're buying a solution that includes AR glasses. I think that might help accelerate things some. But it's going to be ultimately, it's going to be a combination of end users believing that business processes, operational processes are going to get significantly more efficient if they're using AR, and solutions that bring that efficiency to the table, that make that efficiency possible, being available so that it isn't quite as customized, project-based kind of work the way it is right now.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Well, there's lots in here to kind of go over. And we'll put the link into the show notes so people can go and check that out and read a little bit more about what SYNNEX has in store with AR and G Suite and Google Glass and all that stuff. We'll just we'll watch that and see where it goes. I'd like to agree with them, to agree with that AR is going to be somewhere in 2 years. It seems like it's just a really, really slow movement to support that kind of stuff. We'll see. But we're going to take a break from the news, and we're going to take a short break, and that way we can get our guest ready. We have the CEO of Nerdio live, ready. He's in the green room, ready to come on and chit chat with us, primarily about Windows Virtual Desktop, as you kind of were talking about earlier, Rich. So I think it's going to be a great interview, and we're really looking forward to talking to him. So everybody, stick around. We will be right back. And we are back with part 2 of ChannelPro Weekly, where we are joined for a special guest interview, the CEO of Nerdio, Vadim Vladimirskiy. Welcome, Vadim.
Hey, thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're glad to have you here. Lots of exciting stuff going on, especially around Windows Virtual Desktop. That's kind of why we brought you on here today, to talk about that. But before we do, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and about your company, Nerdio?
Sure, I would love to. So Nerdio is a company that enables managed service providers to build successful cloud practices at Microsoft Azure. I actually started an MSP about 15 years ago in Chicago and used virtual desktop technology for really many years. I've been in the industry for a while. And then a few years ago, we started Nerdio as a software platform to help other MSPs do sort of a similar thing and build a virtual desktop IT as a service practice in their region.
Interesting. So you were in the Chicago area. I'm also in the Chicago area. May I ask where you were?
I am in Skokie.
You're in Skokie. Okay. Fantastic. I live a little further out from the Chicago region. I actually live closer to Rockford now, but it's kind of neat that you're like right in the area.
But we're close for sure.
Very close. I used to work pretty close to Skokie, actually. So nice to chat with some of my local peeps, if you know what I mean.
For sure. Hopefully you're enjoying the weather.
Well, actually, right now it's not too bad. Fall in this area is beautiful. So I will kick off the conversation about Windows Virtual Desktop, and then kind of see what Rich has to say. But I'm in the impression that why hasn't Microsoft done this 7 years ago? Right? It seems like this was like would have been the obvious play for Windows after they really established Azure.
Yes.
Vadim, what do you think? Why are we getting this now as opposed to?
I've been getting the question of why Microsoft makes virtual desktops difficult for many years. I've been wondering that myself. My working theory is they really wanted to innovate on the licensing front to really make virtual desktop kind of a mainstream IT delivery model when Azure was ready to handle it, right? So I think, their focus when Azure first launched a few years ago has been around different types of workloads, not necessarily the desktop workload. And I think it's just gotten to the point where it makes sense for that to be the hosting platform. And they've done a bunch of other things to really unblock the market from being able to adopt virtual desktop at scale, with the caveat of it has to be in Azure, right? Which is great, right? I mean, it's great for Microsoft, certainly drives Azure consumption. And they've, in exchange for that, they've eliminated a lot of the licensing blockers and a lot of the technology blockers. So I really expect the market to take off and adopt this technology pretty quickly over the next few years.
I have, first of all, I should point out, I think it's interesting that right before the break, we were talking about augmented reality, and, which is one of those technologies that people have been talking about and saying, great potential, you're going to see enormous adoption of that. And it always, like Matt was saying, always feels like it's about 2 years away. VDI, virtual desktops, exact same story, right? Yep. Like for years, everyone was saying we are right there on the edge of VDI becoming huge. Now, though, we've got Microsoft getting in a big way. So, I mean, how big do you expect Windows Virtual Desktop to become over time? How big a deal is this?
Well, I mean, I think the potential is definitely significant. So, if you think about the virtual desktop market today, I'd imagine, based on some numbers that we're tracking, we're probably in the, tens of millions of seats worldwide that are virtualized. And I think the potential is not only to take a lot of the existing desktop virtualization solutions and move them into WVD, but I think what's more important is taking non-virtualized desktop workloads and really consider WVD for situations where people have never really thought of desktop virtualization, and grow that number significantly into use cases where it really hasn't been considered before, right? And I mean, the reason that desktop virtualization was always, it's about to happen, but it never did, I think really comes down to because the virtual desktop concept is all around Windows. And when you have the company making Windows, making it difficult from a licensing and the technology perspective to really virtualize Windows in the cloud, that sort of doesn't send the right message to kick off adoption. And I think now that Microsoft's saying, okay, we're all in, we're behind it, we now allow you to license it in a multi-tenant way. We have a new operating system designed exactly for that use case. I really think there is a potential for non-desktop virtualized desktop workloads today to be virtualized over the next few years. So, I think 1 billion Windows devices is probably the possible addressable market over the next few years. Will it happen? Who knows? But I think that's the possibility.
So, I mean, from a longer term perspective, it's obviously very early days right now. Even Microsoft, I think, is sort of easing their way into it at this point and making sure that, Azure is really ready to handle the workload. But from a longer term perspective, how big is the opportunity for an MSP? I mean, like you were saying, if they already have virtualized desktops out there, this is kind of a natural thing if you're selling Office 365 too. But should the average MSP be thinking basically that eventually I want most of the desktops that I manage to be virtual desktops?
I think so. If you think about the type of environments MSPs deploy and manage, initially it was all on-prem servers and desktops and networking and such. And now more and more of those server workloads have moved or are moving into the cloud. So what remains behind, is some networking equipment and the end user devices. And I think if WVD plays out as I suspect it will from an economic standpoint and from a reliability of the technology standpoint, the next desktop refresh project that comes along, an MSP will have to make an assessment and say, hey, do I propose a new Exchange server equivalent and replace users' physical desktops? Or do I propose the Office 365 equivalent, which is going to be Windows virtual desktops running in Azure? And the early economics we're seeing of how inexpensive it is to take a user and put them in Azure from just a hardware perspective, it's really becoming a fraction of what a physical desktop costs, because the licensing is included in many cases with the Microsoft 365 suite already.
Nerdio does a lot of Azure business, drives a lot of Azure consumption, and those two words, Azure consumption, are the happiest words in the English language for Microsoft right now. So I assume you are a pretty close Microsoft partner. What are they saying to you about WVD? I mean, how hard are they pushing it now? What are they encouraging you to do with it?
Well, they're definitely very excited about it. It's got visibility really at all levels of the organization. And just a bit of a background on our involvement with the product. So it actually started out as an evolution of our RDS product called RDMI, which is Remote Desktop Managed Infrastructure. They launched that project a couple of years ago, and we were a development partner in a limited preview with them, kind of working alongside. And then I think at Ignite of last year, they decided that instead of rebuilding this remote desktop managed infrastructure, they're going to call it Windows Virtual Desktop, and they're going to host it themselves, right? So the control plane and the management service that routes the user connections and manages the desktop VMs is now Microsoft's responsibility. And what's more important is they're going to have a new operating system that will allow multiple users to connect to the same VM, and they will include the licensing with Microsoft 365, right? So it required a lot of teams at Microsoft to really come together. There's the Azure team, there's the modern workplace, the Microsoft 365 team, there's the Office team. So it was really a company-wide initiative, and they're very excited about it. I mean, there's definitely a lot of excitement internally and a lot of things that they're doing to get it out to market. Now, Microsoft is focused on getting it out to market to their largest customers first. They're looking at this as a big enterprise opportunity. And on the SMB side of the market, or the SMC, the small, mid-sized customers and corporate, they're really looking at partners to help drive that consumption, right? And partners come in, ISV partner like Nerdio that provides the technology to make it easier to deploy and manage, but also their MSP channel, who are the ones that can explain it to the customer, the ones who can deploy it for the customer, manage it, configure it. So this is really a channel play for Microsoft on the SMC side of the market. And they're currently, seems like they're primarily directly focused on just the enterprise.
So how difficult, how lengthy, how challenging an onboarding process for somebody listening or watching the podcast right now who's thinking, I already do Office 365, maybe I should do this as well. How prepared are they today to offer WVD as well, and what will they need to do to get prepared?
Sure. So I'm going to give you my very biased opinion. I think without Nerdio, it's challenging, right? And you can confirm that by just looking at the WVD documentation and the amount of PowerShell you have to write in order to deploy it. And then it's fairly difficult to manage. I think all of that is going to get better over time. Microsoft typically, improves products post GA fairly quickly. But Nerdio bridges that gap. It makes the process of deploying a new WVD environment kind of like a 60-second process to just launch it. And the things that an MSP would need, they would need obviously a relationship with a CSP provider so they can transact Windows 10 Enterprise, or even better, Microsoft 365, because that includes both the Office component and the Windows component in one package. For example, Microsoft 365 Business is a $20 per user SKU, and it has everything you need from a licensing perspective to do Office and Windows and Azure. So that's great. The other thing they need is an Azure subscription, which again, they should be going through their CSP provider. Being a CSP reseller is a good way to go to set up that subscription, although you could go directly to azure.com and just buy it right on Azure. And pay Microsoft with a credit card, but you'll get some discounts and some advantages of going through a CSP provider. And then, they need a tool like Nerdio to actually go in, plug into that Office 365 tenant and that Azure subscription, and turn the dials to create that environment and then give you kind of an easy interface to manage all the various pieces of it. It doesn't take very long. You can have a customer in and testing the environment with WVD probably in an afternoon. It takes about 60 seconds to go through the provisioning screen, and then 2 to 4 hours for it to actually build it. And then once it's built, there's some test desktops and demo accounts. You can go in and start playing with it almost right away.
So what is Nerdio doing around WVD right now, and what are your plans for it?
Yeah, so I mean, what we try to do is we try to bridge some of the functionality gaps that the native Nerdio has, right? Microsoft, because their focus is really very much in the top end of the market with enterprise, they build a lot of flexibility and configurability into their products, which is great if if you have a lot of experience in Azure, but from a simplicity standpoint and from ease of use, it's not great, right? So if you're not an Azure expert, then deploying something like WVD is not trivial. So that's one of the gaps that we see in the MSP market, is making it super easy, really clear, educating and explaining what's necessary, and then doing the automation of the actual deployment. So simplifying the deployment, I would say, is step number one. You can stand up, as I mentioned, the environment in an afternoon, and if you do it manually, you're probably going to spend hours and hours reading documentation and then experimenting with things, and still have a manual way to manage things. So I would say that's number one. Number two, we allow WVD to be auto-scaled automatically. So based on expected user demand, the environment will grow as users logging in, and it will shrink after business hours when users stop using the system, which really drives the cost per user of the infrastructure down dramatically, sometimes up to 75% of what the infrastructure would cost if it was running 24/7. So that adds a lot of value right off the bat, because if you look at the economics, you can have kind of a $4 or $5 per user per month price point for compute and storage running a virtual desktop in Azure that's licensed through a Microsoft 365 that your customer already has, right? So that's great. And then we also have all kinds of management automation features. So like managing the images of the desktops, publishing applications, adding users, all the types of things that MSPs would have to go into the various portals, go into Active Directory, go into Office 365, go into Azure. We consolidate all of that in a single platform and give them a really easy, intuitive UI where they can manage all of the aspects of an IT environment with that virtual desktop at the core.
There is some speculation out there that, and for some people it's more than speculation, but there's an idea afloat out there that Microsoft really would prefer, from a longer term perspective, for Windows users to be on WVD as opposed to running an on-premises license, and that essentially the launch of WVD is the first step in a process that'll play out over years, in which Microsoft kind of prods, if not pushes, people off of the on-prem license and into this cloud-based license. Do you get the sense that that's where they're headed with this?
Maybe to an extent. I'm not sure if it's going to ever be kind of 100% in that direction, but I think the general direction may be right? And I mean, I think there are a few telling signs about this. If you recall, I think it was a year ago or so, they've reorganized internally where Windows became part of the modern workplace organization at Microsoft, as opposed to being a standalone kind of unit as it's been for, forever, for a long time. So it's kind of, it's been rolled under the cloud services divisions there. And the licensing for Windows physical, Windows 10 on physical devices and virtual devices, really the same license. So there's no distinction anymore. It's the same subscription, as long as it's a subscription that covers you for both. So I think what they're expecting is, as Azure gets better, right, and it's already at a point where the cost structure makes a lot of sense, and as local hardware ages and needs to be refreshed, there's really going to be a very compelling case to take that workload and putting it in Azure, running it virtually, and then having the local device just be sort of decoupled from the corporate workload, so to speak. So you have all the applications that are part of your job running in Azure, where Office 365 and everything else is, and then you kind of have this personal device, which they would still prefer that it's a Windows device, obviously, and that's why all the emphasis on Surface and all of those announcements they've made. They still want that to be a Windows device, but I think all of the corporate workloads being in virtual desktop is maybe the direction that they're looking at.
So you're seeing it more as of a hybrid kind of virtual desktop
Yes.
Okay, because I was going to ask that. I was going to ask what the implication on businesses is. Like, is this really the catalyst that will drive everything to thin client? And you're thinking no. You're thinking there's still going to be some compute power necessary at the desktop on a personal level, and of course Microsoft would prefer it be Windows.
Right.
But
That was going to be my point. Thin client could obviously be embedded Windows, and they've structured the licensing in a way that if you look at the fine print, if you have a non-Windows end user device, you have some different licensing requirements. For example, when Microsoft 365 Business, which I mentioned earlier, which is really the most cost-effective SKU to use, doesn't qualify you to use it on a thin client that's not Windows. If it's Windows, it's perfect. If it's not Windows, you need an enterprise M365. But so it could be thin clients in environments where it's just sort of a standard office stationary setup where a user goes to their desk, logs into multiple screens, and uses their devices that way. I think a thin client is the perfect setup in that scenario. But for any mobile users, I think it's going to be a hybrid environment. And the way that Windows Virtual Desktop is implemented is that the remote desktop client that just got released with Windows Virtual Desktop integrates the applications very seamlessly into the start menu. So imagine you have an administrator who publishes an application to a group of users through WVD in Azure, and those users have the WVD client installed. They log into their desktop as normal. They open the start menu, and boom, there is an icon there for your Excel or Word or QuickBooks or whatever you may be using that the administrator published. You click on it, it opens up as an application. It looks totally native, and it's not really running on your machine. So I think they're trying to create that very seamless experience where it's Windows 10 locally, it's Windows 10 in the cloud, and the applications kind of go in between the two in a very seamless way. And what makes it all really work well is imagine you have Office 365 with OneDrive, right? Every user gets a terabyte of storage. And imagine OneDrive being the storage location for whichever application you're running on whichever desktop you are. So you may have a physical desktop at home, a laptop you travel with, a thin client in the office, and you're using a virtual desktop in Azure. You log in, you save a document, it goes into your OneDrive library, and then every single device you have that's hooked into OneDrive now has that document. Right? So it's really very seamless experience from one device to the next, looks identical.
So tell me about the value proposition. I understand the value proposition of you saying all of everything is virtualized in the cloud. I'm seeing less of the value prop saying, well, we're gonna put workloads, some applications in the cloud, but we're still running and licensing and powering PCs in the office, powerful PCs to run things natively. Where does the economics say that makes sense?
Sure. So I think if you take the MSP perspective, right? So if you're an MSP and you're trying to figure out, I have this customer, I'm going to sell them, a managed services package where I may include, end user device management. You obviously want to take as much off of the end user device as you can and put it in the cloud. Now, there are going to be some exceptions. Those are, again, being eliminated. But if you think about, GPU-intensive workloads or video, Azure has all of that capability. It's still a little bit expensive, but it's certainly coming down. So I think those are going to happen over time. But you as a service provider, you want to move as much off of that end-user device as you can into Azure. Now, if you're the user, you still want to be able to do all of your web browsing and your social media and your YouTube and everything else locally, because you do get better local performance, and you don't have to pay for the bandwidth that you would otherwise have to pay in consuming that bandwidth out of Azure. So I think it's going to be a balance. For an MSP, they want to get as much off of off-prem into the cloud as they can because it makes it easier to manage and increases their margin. And then some users will still require personal devices. So the trend we're seeing is business owners, instead of buying equipment for their employees, they will say, hey, I'm going to give you a bring your own device allowance. Let's say once a year, or when you start, I'm going to give you $1,000. It's your device. You can buy a Mac, you can buy Windows, you can buy Android, whatever you want. And then your virtual desktop is where your work life is, right? You always log into this virtual desktop, which is Windows, that has all of the Windows applications, and that's where you do your work. But your own device is just a way of getting into your virtual desktop. So I think that trend is likely to increase because from a business owner's perspective, it's really simple. You don't own these devices. You don't have to worry about managing them, and your data is protected from those devices misbehaving in some way.
Interesting, interesting. You also you mentioned the term bandwidth. This will probably be the last question we might be able to fit in. But anytime you move anything to the cloud, there's obviously a bandwidth impact to service that. What is the if let's say I had an office of 100 people, what is the bandwidth impact that I need out to the cloud to support all that?
It's a good question. I mean, there's definitely a bandwidth impact. There's some bandwidth considerations. It's really about kind of latency and packet loss more than the bandwidth itself. Most broadband connections nowadays are more than good enough to support dozens, if not hundreds of users, even with, kind of business class cable or fiber. All of those are more than good enough to get people, even mobile, right? I work off of a mobile tablet primarily as my primary device, and I almost never go on Wi-Fi. I just use the AT&T network, and it works great. Like, I have full functionality wherever I am with no degradation in performance. So it's more about the stability of the connection rather than the bandwidth that it comes with. The comment I made was, with Azure, you pay for outbound transfer. So anytime you're downloading something out of a Microsoft data center, you are paying for that transfer. So the example to think about is, if you are on a virtual desktop running a YouTube video full screen, you're going to be consuming a lot of outbound bandwidth, and you're going to pay for that bandwidth. And it's much easier to just launch that browser locally and do that same YouTube full screen and not pay for that bandwidth. Does that answer your question?
Do you think do you think employees are going to be able to think that way? I mean, most employees don't even know what the web browser is.
No, they won't. So I mean, I think it's going to be up to the service provider, up to the MSP, to configure the system in such a way that it encourages the use correctly. Now, I don't want it to sound like the impact of the bandwidth, even though you're paying some for that bandwidth, it's a tiny fraction of the total Azure cost, right? Your biggest components are going to be compute, which is virtual machines, and storage, which are like managed disks. And then bandwidth is a tiny single-digit percentage of the total pie. But it's something, right? So I think it's going to be up to the MSP to configure the best practices where the users have the ability to run things locally. They may want to limit certain sites that they don't want them to run on their virtual desktops, right? It may just be a best practice from a security perspective anyway. So no, I think the users themselves will not be, really the ones driving this type of correct usage. I think the MSP are going to be in charge of this.
That definitely makes sense. Well, I can definitely say this. It is going to be a very interesting next few years to see how Windows Virtual Desktop catches on and gets utilized. Because as you said, there's a lot of use case scenarios that probably weren't even thought about with previous VDI type solutions. But this is one that has the potential to radically change how businesses deal with computing and in general. So
for sure. I mean, the best analogy I can think of, a few years ago, MSPs were putting in Exchange servers for a lot of their clients, right? And there came a point where, Office 365 became popular and mature enough where they would give the client an option. Hey, your Exchange server is up for renewal. Here's another option for you. And I think we're kind of there with desktop. So it may not be, hey, let's rip out everything you have today. But as your desktops start to age out and there's a refresh cycle comes up, at least as an option, I think MSPs need to investigate, is it going to be more cost effective for the customer? Is it going to give me more opportunity to earn more margin? And what's going to be the end user experience? And I think those are all questions that will have, check boxes in the WVD column.
Yeah, and if it lines up where it's better value for the more money for the MSP, better value for the customer, it is definitely going to change things pretty dramatically. And we'll definitely keep an eye on it. And hopefully we'll be able to get you back sometime in the future to talk a little bit more about it. In the meantime, if people want to learn a little bit more about Nerdio, where can they go?
Please go to getnerdio.com. We also have a YouTube channel that you can search on YouTube or go through our website. We try to really publish a lot of content. We have a resource called Nerdio Academy that provides all the latest information on the various Microsoft technology that's coming out, especially WVD. Lots of tutorials, lots of white papers. So if you're trying to get up to speed with Nerdio, And I'm sorry, with Windows Virtual Desktop, Nerdio is a good resource to get started and kind of get you through that process.
Awesome. Well, Vadim Vladimirskiy, CEO of Nerdio, thank you so much for joining us here on ChannelPro Weekly, and we hope to have you back again in the future. We are going to take a short break, and when we come back, Rich and I are going to continue on talking about news. We got a story about WatchGuard coming up and some stuff from Tech Data and lots more, including the 2019 ChannelPro SMB All-Star Awards. Lots and lots ahead. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. And we're back with part 3 of ChannelPro Weekly. Part 3 because we had a great interview moments ago with the CEO of Nerdio, Vadim Vladimirskiy. Rich, I thought it was a great interview. I learned so much about Windows Virtual Desktop, and his insight in how it's going to be implemented and how he thinks it might be a value prop and start changing things is just fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea that he has been associated with this product since before it was called Windows Virtual Desktop. So, I mean, he has years of background in this product, and yeah, he was just about the perfect guy to bring on and tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, and I got through a lot of. I know we got through, I think, all of your questions. I had a couple more that I wanted to ask, but we kind of ran out of time. But hopefully, we'll get him back someday down the road if there's any other big Windows Virtual Desktop developments. And he can speak to those a little more often. So very, very cool. But we are going to resume where we left off, talking about the news. And we have a story that came out, something that WatchGuard did. They unveiled the ruggedized firewall. And I'm going to preface this story by saying this. I think we're going to see a lot of these stories, Rich, especially as IoT and things... as I'll just say IoT in general, as IoT spreads and we need more computing power back into the industrial area or office to support this, we're going to see a lot of ruggedized hardware for these types of environments of all of stripes.
I think you're exactly right, and that's what's sort of interesting about this story to me. So the product in question is a firewall from WatchGuard. That firewalls are what they're best known for. It is officially known as the Firebox T35R. And
this rolls right off the tongue. The Firebox T35R.
And what does R stand for?
Ruggedized.
There you go. I mean, so 2 years ago, almost exactly, I think it was December maybe of 2017, WatchGuard introduced a number of different firewalls, one of which was the T35. I think it was the smallest of the 3 new devices that they rolled out there. So, you know, they're looking at the market, they're looking at use cases and customer needs right now. And to your point, as the IoT becomes more and more widespread, as edge computing becomes more and more of a phenomenon in the IT industry right now, there are all of these environments that require the same kind of networking gear that used to, you know, go into a server closet or a data center or so on. But, you know, the operating conditions aren't nearly as friendly to the equipment. And so what WatchGuard did is actually pretty clever. They took an existing product, 2 years on the market, it's already got a footprint out there, and they created a new version of it specifically for use in these kind of IoT use cases. And they call out factories, you know, manufacturing and so on, but really you could use it in a wide range of different environments. It's essentially a T35 that can handle anywhere from -40 to 60 degrees Celsius, huge sort of humidity range that it can tolerate. It's designed to be used in you know, situations where it might be exposed to water or large amounts of dust and so on. So it's been hardened basically for use in hardware unfriendly locations. And it does pretty much what the ordinary T35 does. And so I think you're right. I think you're going to see more and more of these sort of edge-oriented devices, switches, you know, gateways, firewalls, etc., showing up. And I wouldn't be surprised if this kind of a model where an existing product is adapted to that location it doesn't become you know, a common one as well.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of. I see a lot more in the future of we designed a product and a ruggedized version of it that costs blah more because it has to use materials that can withstand all of these different things like water and dust and moisture gasoline and high temperatures and low temperatures. So, how often will I think like right now we're seeing headlines and press releases to kind of showcase these, but I think as we go forward, it's going to be a lot of we introduce a new firewall and its ruggedized counterpart, right? They'll just be introduced at the same time.
Yep.
That's kind of what I think.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense.
Yep. So the IoT ruggedized stuff, it is nice looking. It's red. So I almost thought the R stood for red.
Well, all the fireboxes are red. That's their trademark at WatchGuard, is the bright red firewall.
Yeah, and this thing can operate on DC power directly, which I guess makes sense because that's what most of the AC power supplies do. But it looks like you can just I wonder if you can hardwire DC to it. Interesting. I'm just curious why they would point that out directly, but I guess we use the optional AC power supply. Interesting. DNS Watch has all the kind of nice stuff: gateway, antivirus, VPN connectivity. DNS Watch. Does it have the new DNS Watch Go? Probably not, because that's its own.
Actually, I'll bet it does.
It probably does.
So, I mean, the way the model works with WatchGuard is you buy the device, and then there are all these services that you can purchase as well as add-ons. So they don't necessarily. Some of them probably, I don't know this for sure, but some of them probably come with the box. Most of them, I think, you acquire separately. And typically, more and more often at least, you acquire them as part of a suite. So I know they have this total security suite, I believe it's called, at WatchGuard, that includes a whole bunch of these. And but they run on the T35R just like they do on the T35. So you can put all of that threat detection and response, DNS filtering right out at the edge.
Very cool. All right, you IoT folks, here's the new rugged firewall for you to put in the big farming thing or the big manufacturing, whatever and wherever. We need firewalls everywhere because of those darn nefarious people.
Yeah.
All right. We had a couple more stories here. Tech Data is adding some a couple quick ones here. Let me see. Tech Data adds Carbon Black to their security catalog. I can't talk today, Rich. I need some more coffee. And they're adding something to their security line card. Tell me about what Tech Data is doing with all this.
So technically, this is two different announcements, two different news stories up on the ChannelPro site, one that broke last week, one that broke this week. But they're part of one phenomenon, and this is the main reason why I wanted to spend just a few quick minutes on it here on the podcast. So what they have done is add Carbon Black and Akamai to their line card. And Carbon Black it does antivirus, threat hunting, EDR, endpoint detection and response. Akamai does a number of different things, but there are three in particular I know that Tech Data is starting with. I think it's web application firewall, web and mobile application performance acceleration, and traffic protection. There may be more stuff coming along, but so very different companies in a lot of ways, but what is the same about them, what unifies them, is that they are both cloud native, cloud first security providers. And so the larger phenomenon here is that Tech Data, which obviously has a pretty extensive security line card, really feels like there is this whole new generation of cloud native security products out there that are really designed, from the ground up to secure cloud environments. And they want to strengthen their line card, their catalog with more of these solutions. So two just in the last week. If you go back, I believe it was to August, they signed a deal with another cloud native security company called Opaque. OPAQ is how it's spelled. It's pronounced Opaque. Smaller company. Actually, it's only been in business, I'm guessing 18 months, 2 years, something like that. Relatively new company. And the Tech Data folks are saying you can expect to see a combination of sort of emerging and niche players like that do one particular thing really, really well from Tech Data's perspective, plus more of these established brands like Carbon Black and Akamai. But without naming any names or dropping any hints or so on, they made it pretty clear that they're not done. Since August, they've added three of these new cloud first kinds of security providers. there are more coming, and I imagine we won't be waiting long before some of those announcements show up.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Yeah, all of the distributors definitely are enhancing their security offerings and EDR, because we know that's hell, it's all we practically talk about anymore, Rich, is security and all these new security products.
You know, the thing about security, aside from the fact that it's an enormous issue, an enormous danger, and the thing that's likeliest to get you fired from by your customers, is that it's like the common denominator on everything else that we talk about, right? You know, networking, software as a service, business app, whatever it is, they've all got to be secured. So it just makes this an enormous market and an enormous opportunity for ChannelPros.
So I'll ask this question only because whenever I see stories like this where a distributor adds something to their security offering, do these two things put Tech Data at any significant advantage over any other distributor that's doing security offerings?
The only, and I'll double check this while we're here, but in fact, I know that so Akamai has never done business with a distributor before. This is their first distribution contract. So in that sense, yes, for now at least, and who knows? I mean, they may be in negotiations with other leading distributors, but for now at least, if you want to buy their software, Akamai software, through distribution, the only place you can do that is Tech Data. So I guess that does put them. I don't really know about Carbon Black, though, one way or the other.
Well, there you have it, folks. Run, don't walk to your nearest Tech Data rep and get yourself some Akamai. Sounds like a sauce you'd put on like sushi. Akamai.
Yeah, I wonder. Maybe it is. I don't actually know where that name came from.
Yeah, maybe it is. Maybe they were like they're trying to figure out what to name their company or their product, and they were sitting in a sushi restaurant, and they brought over the typhoon roll with Akamai sauce. Like, bam, there it is.
I mean, you know the story about how Apple Computer became Apple Computer, right? It's pretty much the same idea. So.
Yeah. Inspiration comes from weird places, even sushi restaurants. I'm not saying that is where this came from, but it's a name that kind of sounds like that's where it would have come from. So in my brain, I'm going to say this was a sauce. This was a sauce somewhere, and they took. And if not, I'm going to invent the Akamai sauce because I think it just screams, pour me over something. Good times. Good times. All right, Rich. Well, I think that's going to cover the news, and we've still got quite a bit left to talk about. So we are going to move on and get to the large story that broke last week. We put the results online live on October 1st. Now this is going into a digital issue or a print issue. I can't remember what October is.
October is print.
October is print. So there is a print issue that will be landing in mailboxes probably in the next 5 days, I would think, right?
Yeah, that's right. Should be. Actually, some people will probably start getting it today.
Excellent. So very timely talking about it here on the show. The 2019 ChannelPro SMB All-Star Awards is here. The list is live and published, and the winners have been notified on social networks and via other means. So, Rich, for those who are unfamiliar with the ChannelPro SMB All-Star Awards, can you please give us a little primer about what they are and how they are selected?
Yeah, so we have a number of different award programs that we do over the course of the year, but the two biggies are the Reader's Choice Awards and the All-Star Awards. And the Reader's Choice Awards is where we go out and we ask our readers, what are your favorite products, your favorite vendors, in I think it's 50 categories now. But the All-Star Awards are different. That's where the editorial team at ChannelPro sits down, and we look back at everything that's happened in the industry in the last 12 months. And we put together a list of companies that we feel have had a significant impact on the SMB channel in that 12-month period. There is no minimum number. There is no maximum number. I'm sure we've handed out as few as 10 or 12. I think last year it was like 19. This year, I want to say it's 15 plus the 2 sort of special awards, the Lifetime Achievement Award and the Not-for-Profit Award. Basically, if you don't clear a bar, a pretty high bar, strict editorial bar that we put up in terms of the importance of what you've done, you don't get an award. And if at the end of the year we have only identified 7 companies that we think are truly all-stars, that's how many awards we hand out.
Yeah, and when we devised this, we thought that was important, not to have a set number, because if you have to have a set number, then you're always kind of stretching or reaching in order to get to whatever number you push, or cutting out some who would actually be more, who actually would have made it if we didn't already hit the cap. So I thought it was important that we did no minimum or maximum.
And what it winds up meaning is every name on the list really deserves to be on the list. Yeah, and let me tell you, folks, we have long, heated discussions sometimes about the SMB All-Stars. So these are our picks. We do solicit nominations, but it's really important to note that it has to be something tangible or something that they've done in the last year to qualify them for an All-Star, or to have us consider them for an All-Star. There are a lot of great companies out there. Rich, give me an example of a company. My mind is drawing blank of one who didn't get an All-Star award this year. Oh gosh, all the names that are coming to me got an award. That's because I have the list in front of me, and that's all I can think about. Okay, yeah, exactly. I'll give you an example. NETGEAR. NETGEAR did not get a All-Star award this year. Now, that does not mean NETGEAR is a bad company, or they didn't do anything interesting, or that they didn't do anything. We just don't believe, based on the nominations we've got and the stories that we covered and what we saw, we did not believe that they did something that warranted that was a major impact on the SMB channel specifically this year. Doesn't mean they're a bad company. It just means that this year they didn't hit what we considered that bar. Now, does that mean next year they won't be an All-Star? No, they could do something crazy tomorrow that changes the world, and then we would talk about it and have that. And I don't know how you do it, but through the year I have like my sheet that I put like interesting things that I saw, like, wow, that could be a big deal, or that seems like a big deal to me. Let's put that on my sheet, and we'll talk about that when we get to the All-Star selection process. Is that kind of how you do it? You know what? That's how I should do it. It's interesting because we also have this issue we do every spring called, or a story we do every spring called Vendors on the Vanguard, which is where we call attention to vendors that are emerging, up and coming, lesser known, and that we think our readers would be interested to know more about. And in that case, yeah, I've got this list that I'm sort of building all year long when I come across somebody. In this case, I really should be doing that over the course of the year, but instead what I do is I just sit down at some point and look back at, what have I written in the last year, and what's happened in the industry in the last year, and what, do I think should get a company on the list. Yeah, and we all bring them to the table, and we solicit nominations from readers too. We have a form that you can go to online and fill out and nominate a company, because we cover a lot. We try to watch everything, but we cannot cover everything. Nobody really can. And we may look at something differently than say an MSP directly, or a company that did something that impacted you in some way. So we want you to nominate those companies and tell us why you think we should consider them for an All-Star award. And we consider them. We absolutely do. And sometimes we give awards based on that. But it can't be something like, I want to nominate NETGEAR because NETGEAR is a great company. It's like, we know NETGEAR is a great company. We absolutely do. But we need something specific, a change in a partner program that makes it far more profitable for MSPs to work with that company, or a new product that is going to change the channel and the way MSPs do business. What are some other examples, Rich, of things? Well, actually, no, we'll talk. You'll get plenty of examples as we talk about them. Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to illustrate what this is about. Yeah, so we have
we have our All-Star Awards. We also have two new kinds of All-Star Awards that we did this year. We talked about the first one last week, which was the ChannelPro SMB Lifetime Achievement All-Star Award. And I believe this is something that we're going to do every year now, Rich. Is that correct? Or only if it's warranted?
Exactly. Yeah. So for both of these awards, the not-for-profit and the Lifetime Achievement Award, I think the goal is to hand one out every year, but never to feel like we're reaching to just fill that bucket.
Right. And so we talked about the Lifetime Achievement All-Star Award, and we gave that to Mr. Arnie Bellini, which, yeah, obviously, Arnie is instrumental into the creation of managed services and laid the groundwork for the business model that so many have found engaging and profitable even to this day. So I think that was a great choice. And I could probably think of a couple others that might be in that category in the next couple of years.
Yeah, well, it'll be, one of the things that intrigued me when I was listening to the last episode of the podcast that you did with Dave is that he kind of hinted, I know some names that, might make sense. And he didn't want to talk about that because he didn't want to take the spotlight off of Arnie, which I thought was nice of him. But it does make me wonder, the next time I talk to Dave, I'm going to ask, well, who do you have in mind? And, in terms of soliciting nominations from listeners and readers and so on, it'll be interesting to see if we start getting suggestions specifically for the Lifetime Achievement Award, because I imagine a lot of people have opinions about people who have earned that title.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll be a big one. And I will also point out that you don't have to, there's no fee to nominate a company or a person for an All-Star Award. You submit the nomination and we will consider it. But in order to be considered for an All-Star, we have to look at your, you have to tell us why. And if you don't put anything why, then we don't really consider it. So you have to tell us why. And there's no cost to do that. We will consider any company for any reason and we will argue it. And you also got to put your contact information though, because sometimes we need to reach out and get a little more from you. Like we might look at it and say, that's interesting. We need to understand a little bit more about what your thought process is here, how it really impacted you. So that way we can kind of consider it better. So don't be afraid to put your email address. We won't contact you unless we need follow-up information. You're not going on a spam list or anything like that. The not-for-profit All-Star is also new this year. Rich, why did we do this?
This was a suggestion. So I'm going to say 3 years ago, our colleague Colleen Fry, who's the managing editor at ChannelPro, introduced a column called Not for Profit. And so she is on the prowl all the time. She's looking around for vendors and MSPs and VARs and basically anyone within our audience doing, contributing to their communities in various ways. And she actually was the one who suggested, we hear so many of these great stories. It would be nice if we were to pick one out each year, one that's especially interesting and compelling, and give it some extra attention by giving that a company an All-Star Award. I thought it was a great idea, and this year it went to D&H. It's just this wonderful story. We'll have a link to it in the show notes. But essentially it began as D&H deciding that they were going to they partnered with the local Make-A-Wish Foundation, and it started out as, we're going to make a wish come true for a sick child, and it was such a moving experience for the employees there that they decided, let's make wishes come true for every single sick child in this regional Make-A-Wish office, and literally everybody at the company got involved in this, and in very direct ways. It's worth reading about, and that got them the All-Star.
That's great. It's very nice that we were able to recognize them for that, and it's a pretty cool addition to the All-Stars. But now to the main event, the All-Star Awards themselves. We have several. We will link to the All-Star Awards page, so you can go and we spell out here why we gave them an All-Star Award, because like I said, we narrow on something specific. That seemed like it was a big deal. And so we're not just publishing a list of logos, be like, these are the ones that won. We're telling you what we thought about. So Rich, why don't we pick one or two each and talk about that?
Well, I'll just start with the last name on the list, only because the list is alphabetical, and that is Zeisel. And the main reason I bring it up is because it ties right into what we were just talking about before. So they introduced a VPN firewall not too long ago, actually, that is specifically designed for use with video surveillance solutions. So it's designed for use outside. It supports longer cable runs. It can deal with bad weather. It's got reinforced surge protection. And we have already seen, so, there's the WatchGuard device we were just talking about. Adtran has a device that's actually pretty similar to the Zeisel one that came out within the last few weeks. So we've already seen other companies begin to do this, but really the first company that we came across that really started thinking about these specialized use cases, and in this case, outdoor kind of use case, was Zeisel. And interesting product, trendsetter in the industry, and that's the kind of impact that we talk about when we talk about All-Stars.
Yeah, and since they did that one, we are, like you said, we are seeing more purpose-built devices that generally were just more general devices for all different kinds of use cases. And I tip my hat to Zeisel. I thought it was pretty significant when we saw it, and it turns out they were trend setting, and that was very cool. I would like to talk about which one? The first one I'm going to talk about is Lenovo. Now, this is not the first time Lenovo has been on the All-Star Awards. Lenovo is a very large company. They have a very aggressive SMB channel program, lots of SMB channel partners. And of course, they are the maker of the ThinkPad, which is like the default de facto standard in business and enterprise notebooks. Well, they got a All-Star Award this year because they decided to come out with a brand new line of products specifically for the SMB channel that takes a lot of the secret sauce that you see in the ThinkPad line, mixes it a little bit with some of the more consumer-driven features, but still maintains a business focus, and are targeting this line of notebooks specifically to the SMB channel. And I thought that was a pretty bold move, and I think it will absolutely make an impact on the kind of notebooks Lenovo partners are selling into their SMB channel customers. What do you think, Rich?
No, I thought it was a great choice for the list as well. I mean, and part of the way we spun it when we were explaining that selection is it's always kind of a big deal when Lenovo adds another product line with Think at the beginning. I mean, that's it's a pretty iconic set of brands: ThinkPad, Think Server, and so on. And so these new products that we're talking about here are called Think Books. And it says something basically that from Lenovo's standpoint, these products deserve their own name. They are in a category of their own, essentially, in that they are affordably priced. They have the kind of stylish look and design and form factor that younger millennial age users in particular are kind of looking for. They have a lot of that Lenovo durability to them. It's an interesting combination of products. It's reminiscent of some of the other things that you see going on out in the market right now, like the Surface laptop line from Microsoft and Chromebooks and so on. This is, I think, Lenovo's answer to those kinds of products, and interesting product, and an interesting selection of devices that they put in this ThinkBook line.
Concurred. Anytime you see Think on a notebook, it's a big deal for Lenovo because they don't do it for just everything, right? They could have easily done like another SMB thing in the ThinkPad line, because they've had SMB focused notebooks in the ThinkPad line before, but this is something different and absolutely worthy of its own category, and I think it's going to be very successful for them and for their partners. Rich, you get to pick one now.
So I am going to call out StorageCraft, and this is another kind of good example of the sort of thing that will get you on the all-star list. So, I can best provide context for this maybe by recapping a conversation I had with an MSP a few months ago, and I'll won't call him out by name, but I mean essentially he said he used to be a big StorageCraft partner because he likes their products a lot. But then Datto came out with this BDR appliance called the Alto, which is sort of their lower end, entry level kind of product. And the price point on that and the functionality was so appealing to this guy, and there were other products from Datto that he liked as well, that he wound up sort of jumping ship and becoming a Datto guy. So fast forward a few years, this year, StorageCraft comes out with a product that essentially is their answer to the Alto. It's called the OneSafe Solo 300. It is a compact appliance. It's designed to mostly fail your data over into the cloud, affordably priced. So a lot like the Alto. I can't do a sort of spec to spec sort of comparison, but it fits within that same segment of the market. And in fact, when it came out, I sent an email to this MSP I'd been speaking with and said, hey, if StorageCraft had this before, would you have stuck around with them? And he says, quite possibly. This was missing from their product lineup before. So what's significant about it is not only does this sort of round out the product portfolio from StorageCraft, it now means that Datto has competition in that entry-level segment from a very substantial BDR vendor. And you can bet that they're going to be looking for ways to take a step ahead of StorageCraft in this area. Like the next Alto release could have some interesting new functionality that maybe would have come eventually, but maybe it's going to be there faster because there is some of this competitive spirit in the industry now. Between StorageCraft and Datto and anyone else in BDR now, we'll be looking to see where they play at the low end as well. So it's a good thing for StorageCraft partners that this product came out, but one hopes that it becomes a good thing for the industry too if it stimulates more competition and therefore innovation.
Yeah, and we've got another pair of SMB All-Star Award winners here for completely different reasons, but also a little bit because of the need for competition in certain market segments. You want to talk about those real quick, or do we want to move on because we are running a little close on time? What do you think?
Well, why don't you just take one more pick yourself, and then we'll maybe move forward.
Well, because I'd like to talk about them together,
okay,
if possible.
That's all right.
So why don't we both AMD and Intel made the All-Star list this year, and generally that doesn't always happen for two completely different things. So Intel made the list primarily. They did a lot of things this year, particularly data center driven. But one of the most significant ones that I and you and I'll just say we felt was that the Optane DC persistent memory modules that they came out with this year absolutely has the potential to radically change data centers and all that stuff. Because imagine you can now build a server. You still need one physical RAM chip, right? One actual DDR RAM chip, but the rest can be all the Optane DC persistent memory, which isn't quite as fast as DRAM, but it's persistent and it's way cheaper. So you can, but it still looks like RAM to the server. So it moves a lot of the workloads close to the processor, and you can have 48 terabytes, right, of active memory, if you will, in a server system, and that's huge, Rich.
Yeah, I have been fascinated. So, what the Optane product line from Intel has been around for a couple of years. What they introduced in the past 12 months was these persistent memory products. Like, it was an addition. I guess they call them Optane DC persistent memory modules. That's new and a very, very interesting addition for system builders and anyone operating a data center. But I've been fascinated by Optane since it came out, precisely because it fills this spot, or sits within this spot in the market that nothing else quite like it that I'm aware of anyway fits into. This idea, as you were saying, of something that's faster than external storage but cheaper than DRAM, and enables you to do things potentially that you couldn't do with hardware before. I just think it's a really interesting technology.
Yeah, absolutely, and very worthy of being on the list this year, because definitely a product that's going to make an impact. We also gave AMD an All-Star Award this year. We gave them an All-Star Award last year too. Not exactly for the same thing. We talked a lot about the Ryzen platform last year and the Zen architecture, which was a big deal, and we're kind of calling them out and awarding them for the Zen 2 architecture, the new Ryzen 3000, but also because of the new EPYC server processors, which are really good. I'll say, but also AMD this year was the first. This is the first time that I can think of, Rich, and stop me if I'm wrong. Intel is generally known to be on the cutting edge of processor fabrication, and their die shrinks. They've gone from 32 nanometers to whatever. AMD is the first to go to 7 nanometers. Now it was Global Foundries who did that because AMD doesn't own their own fabrication, but they were the first in this case to put out a line of processors on a 7 nanometer manufacturing process, and that is giving them significant advantages right now in comparing head to head with some of Intel's lines, and practically achieving parity with a lot of Intel processors is kind of a big deal for the industry, I would say. And we're already seeing, and we need a competitive AMD to keep Intel going and innovating. Otherwise, we kind of stagnate, and we did stagnate, I think, for a while. And we're seeing the result of this. Intel is making a lot of moves. They're cutting prices, and they're introducing some new stuff. So I think it's a big one. What do you think?
No, I completely agree. I mean, so it's a huge landmark, for AMD that they've reached parity with Intel from a spec standpoint. But sort of like StorageCraft and the BDR, AMD giving Intel a run for its money is a good thing for the industry. Just as you're saying, basically that is going to fuel some innovation and competition. And it's been really interesting over the last 12 months looking at how many AMD-powered PCs have been showing up and how much attention they've been getting. So the other big thing for Microsoft last week that we didn't get a chance to talk about because I wasn't on the show is that whole big Surface hardware wave that Microsoft introduced, which included, some AMD SKUs, basically, just not the kind of thing that would normally happen before. When I was at the HP partner event in February, same kind of thing. They had 2 different business laptops that they introduced in conjunction with that event. Both of them use AMD chips, and it's just, it doesn't mean that HP is moving away from Intel, but they are incorporating more AMD, and it's just an illustration of the impact that the Zen architecture is having on the industry.
Yeah, and you're going to see that industry wide too. The big processor shortfall from Intel, the big shortage that we had, it impacted a lot of OEMs, and I think they're saying, you know what, we love Intel, and of course, Intel's still a 300-pound gorilla, and they make fantastic products. But I do think you're going to see more of the OEMs diversify a little bit, just to cover their own butts in case there is another big shortage like that happens again. You don't want to have all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unless they're cooked, then you can have them in one basket. Because I don't know how they like to make their. Well, we don't need to talk about eggs. We did that on the other show. I need to get new material, Rich. All right, we're going to move on from this. We got 20 minutes. We'll see what we can go through here real quick. The next story we're going to talk about is digital marketing agencies. Rich, what's this all about?
And yeah, in the interest of time, I'm going to move through this and the next one quickly. And I do want to leave some time for the tech pick and the museum visit and so on. So, we've certainly spoken a lot in the podcast. We've written a lot at ChannelPro about this phenomenon of channel convergence, as it's often referred to. This idea that you've got print partners and telco partners and audiovisual partners moving into the IT space and introducing IT management, endpoint management, network management kinds of services. And SMBs, many of them are interested in the one-stop shopping aspect of that. There are 2 different kinds of partners, though, that I keep coming across my radar lately. that are also increasingly moving into IT, but that don't get discussed quite as often as the print guys and the telco guys. And one of those categories, so the other one, which we won't be talking about here, by the way, is just accounting companies. And you don't really think about accounting companies as technology companies, but they're all dealing with accounting software. Now that the accounting software is all in the cloud, they're actually kind of becoming cloud computing businesses, or businesses that have some savvy in that area. And you're starting to see accounting companies talk to their clients about IT services. So too are digital marketing agencies. So think about partners of a company like Salesforce, for example. Marketing companies, they specialize in demand generation for their clients. And to the extent that they're using Salesforce and providing Salesforce services, which a lot of them do to businesses, and helping them implement Salesforce as a marketing platform, they're coming into contact with networks and IT and beginning to introduce IT services. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword, as this article indicates. So on the one hand, you could be down the road, maybe a little bit, facing some competition from some of these digital marketing companies. In the short term, though, you also have the opportunity to partner with them because they need to be touching IT to introduce some of these digital services that they offer, but they don't actually know a whole lot about IT yet. They're most of them are learning about that. So there is that opportunity for you to be their IT partner, and in the process, learn about what they do and potentially get into digital marketing services yourself.
Interesting. We'll put a link to that article in the show notes. There's a lot in there. There's some really good quotes, and it'll definitely give people something to think about. And of course, the other thing to think about, which is on the mind of every business owner who employs people, is how to keep good people in your company and not lose them, especially in a very competitive environment where for employees, there's lots of opportunity everywhere, and you want to keep your own. So we have a piece, 4 ideas for retaining your top people. Rich, tell us about this and maybe one of the ideas, and then we'll send everyone else to read the rest.
Okay. So this is based on a conversation I had with Sunny Kyla, who is the president, I believe, of IT by Design. IT by Design does a number of different things, but among them is outsourcing and staffing. So they have something like 700 technical people of one kind or another on the payroll. And therefore, they have a ton of experience both in acquiring technical employees and retaining technical employees. And when I was at the IT Glue conference a few weeks back, I sat down with Sunny and kind of asked him, picked his brain a little bit. I mean, what are some of the things you do to retain the good people that you have? Because you have way more experience in this area than a lot of our readers do.
And I know exactly what he said. Bacon.
What?
Unlimited amount of bacon.
Not too far from the truth. So I'll reel off really quickly without getting into any detail. The 4 ideas, he said, treat your team like a family. Don't just treat them like employees. And one of the ways that Sunny does that is, he says, every morning he goes around the office with coffee and he pours coffee for people, and he brings healthy snacks in. It's not just, free food, but healthy free food. I care about your health. He said, create a safe environment, a sense of safety. So you want people to feel like they can speak up. They're not crouching all the time, worried that a manager is going to get upset with them. Create an environment where people feel empowered to speak up and do great work. Take career development seriously and be flexible about it. One of the biggest mistakes around career development that people make is assuming that everybody must move up the ladder, or else they're somehow not measuring up. But there are people out there who are, have been doing what they're doing for a long time. They're fantastic at it, and that's all they want to do. And you just need to find other ways, basically, to help them acquire skills or grow in the job that they're in right now, as opposed to maybe pushing them into roles that they don't want to be in. And then the fourth idea kind of goes to this whole not-for-profit thing we were talking about before, which is just, give people on the team a way to give back to the community. It really it pulls people together inside the company, and it just really makes them feel good about the company and being a part of it. So more detail about all of that is available online. I appreciate Sunny for making some time to share some of his secret sauce essentially with us, and you can read up on it on channelpronetwork.com.
Yeah, I still like the bacon idea though.
Yeah,
you just have a big tray of bacon, and then everybody can have bacon every day. You'll have your health insurance premiums might be a little high for your company, but everybody will be happy.
We're going to come back to bacon, by the way. Just a little hint. Before this show is over, we're coming back to bacon.
I cannot wait. I always love to hear more about bacon. Good. Well, that wraps up our stories. But of course, it is not over yet. We still have a few fun things to go over, particularly the museum picks. So it was great last week. Dave shared one of his own museum picks. It was an old Apple II motherboard, older than most of the stuff I have here. I don't have a lot of stuff that goes back to the 70s. So that was very interesting and neat to see. But this week, it is back to my museum. Now, Rich, I want you to close your eyes and think back to like 2004, 2003, and you're, maybe 2005 even, and you're a mobile computer user, and you're scoping around. But what was the one thing that like you were always desperate to find as a mobile computer user in 2005? Wi-Fi, yes. It was like, okay, today Wi-Fi is ubiquitous. It's like you can pull out your laptop practically anywhere, like in the middle of a farm field, right? And you'll probably find some kind of wireless network. Whether or not you can connect to it is another thing. But most of the time, most of the places you go, Wi-Fi is available. It's almost an assumption that it's there. But that was not the case in 2005. In fact, you were like always hunting to see if you could find Wi-Fi. And back then, smartphones were not really a big thing quite yet at that point. Some people had them with Wi-Fi, but it certainly wasn't ubiquitous. That didn't happen until the late 2000s after the iPhone. So, Rich, it was a royal pain in the butt to pull out your notebook and like every time you found a new spot and to see if there was Wi-Fi, or you're walking around with your notebook. So one of the things that you might have had in your little tool arsenal is one of these. I'll hold it up here. And Rich Pytel, this is a NETGEAR product. This is the NETGEAR Wi-Fi Finder. So the way it worked is you would be walking around and you would hold down a button right here, and it would it had three little lights, red, yellow, and green, that would indicate whether or not Wi-Fi was available and kind of give you a rough idea of how good the Wi-Fi was. Now, it did not necessarily mean that the network was open for you to connect. It just meant, it just meant I have found the frequency range of, I believe it was 802.11g at the time. I have found those frequencies in use in this spot. Now pull out your notebook and see if there's something you can connect to. Did you ever have anything like this?
Well, it's funny because this is bringing back a vivid memory to me it's got to be circa 2004, 2005. I may even still have been at Microsoft at the time. And I remember reaching into a swag bag, like the little giveaway items. And I pull out a little device with a green and a yellow and a red bulb on it and a button. And I press the button and one of the lights lights up. And this is how not technical I am. And also how new Wi-Fi was at the time. It's like, what the hell is this? Why do I need to know that the green light lights up when I had no idea what this thing did? So yes, I did have one. I didn't use it because I was clueless about what it was.
Yeah, these were, I knew a bunch of people that had these at the time, but I worked online at the time, and I was a mobile work person. So we were working from restaurants and coffee shops and a lot of stuff. So like this was just a super duper handy thing to have at the time. And lots of other people had it. And of course, like today, you don't need anything like this. I mean, you can look at your cell phone and scan and see all of the wireless networks by name. And if you're in a city, or if you're in a, heck, even from where I'm like in like a neighborhood, right? I could probably open my phone and it will find, 8 or 9 different SSIDs from this particular spot. So you just don't need this anymore, because you just have to assume that there's some kind of Wi-Fi there. Maybe again, like that you can't connect to it, but a product like this would be useful, because every time you use it, it's going to tell you that there's something there. That's why you don't need it anymore. So a little bit of history, but that will lead me into my tech pick, Rich. So that was then, this is now, and this is now. We don't need anything like this. But if you are a small business owner, or if you own an office, or you want to provide Wi-Fi to customers, or you want to provide better Wi-Fi for your office, a new access point would be the way to go. And NETGEAR, I chose a NETGEAR one because I had the NETGEAR Wi-Fi Finder, so I picked a NETGEAR product. This is the NETGEAR AC 1900 Nighthawk Wi-Fi access point. Definitely business grade. It's got a 700 milliwatt antenna on it, power antenna, and very, very good range. You don't have to wall mount it. You can kind of stick it anywhere, and poof, you can make Wi-Fi available for everyone within range. Isn't that nice, Rich? Everybody likes Wi-Fi.
Yes, they do. Faster the better.
The faster the better. And it's kind of, you practically can't go anywhere without getting Wi-Fi these days, which is kind of nice.
It is. How safe that Wi-Fi is, who knows? But yeah, it is pretty much everywhere you go.
Right. And so my software pick, everyone, find a good VPN provider, because that Wi-Fi might be available, but I don't necessarily always recommend using it unless you are using a nice VPN solution. So subscribe to one of those, folks. It's a very good idea if you're out on the road. So anyway, that was there's not much to talk about my tech pick. It's a really nice access point. I'll break down some of the specs. 802.11 AC, not Wi-Fi 6. I haven't found a good business grade access point with Wi-Fi 802.11 AX is what that's called yet. But as soon as there is, we'll recommend one of those dual band gigabit Ethernet ports on it, external antennas, 700 milliwatt. It's got 1.9 gigabits per second wireless capability. Yeah, good stuff. USB 3, if you want to add storage to it. Range extender mode. So if you already have a router, you can put this in a range extender mode and use it as just a range extender, which is kind of nice. Yeah, all good stuff. You go and get 3 of them, Rich. One for every room.
Yeah.
Flood your building with Wi-Fi so no one else can connect. All right. So that wraps up our tech pick. Rich, if you were going to tell us what has been, and there better be bacon involved, and what will be, what would it be?
Well, to find out what has been, what you want to do is go to the ChannelProNetwork.com homepage. Every Friday, you will find our In Case You Missed It post there, written by our own James Gaskin, where he wraps up news from the week that was. This week, he's going to be talking about some interesting news from Avaya that I think got overlooked a lot, the release of Apple's new Mac OS version, some new Xeon chips from Intel, who we were talking about before. And actually, James is going to be writing about I'll just say a new beer that the Apollo astronauts might have liked. But the other story idea that we were kicking around was, you may have seen, if you pay attention to the business press, there's a bit of a pork shortage developing out there right now, and there are concerns, Matt, that there may be a bacon shortage in 2020.
No!
So let's not panic, people, but just be aware. Bacon prices may be heading up. Could be a bacon shortage. Now, if you want to know, so speaking of what's heading up or coming up in this case, looking ahead to next week, Acronis is holding its first global cyber summit. They are set to introduce their new security product. We've been kind of hinting at that all year. They've been hinting at that all year. It will officially reach market next week. I will be there. Continuum is holding the second edition of its Navigate Partner event. They did one in Pittsburgh. Now they're going to do one in Las Vegas for the folks who in the Western United States. Dave Seibert's SMB Tech Fest is holding its Q4 event in Anaheim next week. And the Business Technology Association, the BTA, which works with print partners for the most part, is holding its conference in Asheville, North Carolina. So big week coming up.
Scary on the bacon shortage, man. And you'd think that I'd be like, hey, no problem. There's always turkey bacon, but it is just so not the same thing.
No. There is no substitute for pork fat. I'm sorry.
That's true. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Very scary times, apocalypse times, bake apocalypse. Although, I used to say bacon was good in everything. But a little funny side story before we close out. We happened to be wandering the local Aldi one day, and they had a maple bacon flavored coffee. So we decided to be like, well, what the hell, right? Anything bacon flavored, we tend to want to try. And we bought it knowing that like it's either going to be really good or it's going to be really, really bad. And I got to tell you, bacon coffee, not so good. The maple part, the taste wasn't so bad, but the smell when you were drinking it was just like, wow, that's meat. It was just strange.
Yeah. No, I mean, the logic behind the product is clear enough, right? Because you eat coffee and bacon together pretty regularly. Why not have them all in the same cup? But yeah, it didn't work. Didn't work. No, I can't say I recommended it. Now they had a maple bacon potato chip. That was very good. Meat coffee was just a little too strange for me. So we ended up we tried it 2 times, brewed 2 pots, and we're like, you know what? I think that experiment did not work out. So, but if you like maple bacon coffee, folks, let me know why. And you can do that in lots and lots and lots of ways. You can send us an email, podcast@channelpronetwork.com. Send us your comments, thoughts, stories that you want us to talk about. We'll absolutely do it. If you can reach us on the social networks, we are Channel Pro Network on Facebook. We are at Channel Pro SMB on Twitter. If you want to follow me, I'm at Matt Whitlock on Twitter. Rich, you are? At Rich Free.
So we're on all of those places. And of course, our website, channelpronetwork.com. Make it your homepage. We got news stories and great articles and stuff that we're talking about here, but there's more. There's more than we talk about on the show. All day, every day, hitting the website. It'll keep you up to date. And it's something that you definitely need to keep your eyes on. As far as the show, Channel Pro Weekly, the best way to get Channel Pro Weekly is to subscribe. We're on iTunes, we're on Stitcher, we're on Google Play Podcasts, just pretty much anywhere where podcasts are found. You can find us. Throw us into your favorite podcast application, and when we do new shows, poof, they will just magically show up. You can watch the show on YouTube. Go to our YouTube channel. Just search for it. You'll find it's Channel Pro Network, I believe. And you'll find Channel Pro Weekly there. You can watch us. You'll see the museum pics and all that stuff. It's all good times, and engage us in the comments. Tell us what you think and have fun. Rich's computer's making noise. That was yours, because I know you have a hard stop here and you have to go. So I'm going to close this out. But yeah, subscribe to the show in all of those different places. And that's what you want to do. Special extra thanks to Vadim Vladimirskiy from the CEO of Nerdio for being on with us today and talking with us about Windows Virtual Desktops. It was great having him on. We hope to have him back again in the near future. And lots more to come in the weeks ahead, Rich. Lots of exciting things. Don't you think?
Well, absolutely. Yeah.
Lots of exciting things, folks. It's all coming. So definitely subscribe. Stay tuned. If you're on YouTube, subscribe and hit the bell thing, because the subscribe button really doesn't do anything. You got to hit the bell. Then you know when we put new shows out. And you're not going to want to miss it. Lots of great things coming up. We will see you all in episode 121 next week.